Hello, I'm Dr. Thomas Maples, and welcome back to The Myth Within. First of all, I want to thank everyone who has stayed with this forum in my long absence, as what seems to happen with many. I got distracted with all the bells and whistles that were going on around me, and part of trying to get this back into gear, it really is a prevalent part of learning how to focus the psyche despite all the distractions we may see going on around us with media, social media, and everything buying for our attention concurrently. And so, with that being said, I do want to thank everyone who has stayed with this forum, and for anyone that is new, I want to welcome you and talk a little bit about what we're going to be exploring in The Myth Within. My overall goal in this podcast is to explore the psychological content that arises within the personal myths we make as it interrelates with collective myths. Now, stories such as mythology or fairy tales or even religious stories, they speak to us through a level of collectiveness. They touch upon foundations of the psyche, or what the Greeks called the soul, to move us forward into and a higher order knowledge of what is happening. And from this knowledge, we could begin to direct our lives in many ways away from the doodads, the bells, the whistles that'll distract us as we try to find a path that has meaning and purpose. Now, one of the dangers in trying to engage such a path is it touches upon ontological questions that are existential in nature. And as soon as we begin to define such a path, one of the natural states of the human psyche is to get distracted by various forms of emotion or thought processes that can sway it away from the path that soul is trying to express within the life that is lived. So, how do we deal with the division that often occurs between soul and the direction it wants to take and the individual goals of the ego, that sense of who we are that is attracted to a lot of these bells and whistles and engages in the aspects of day-to-day life? How do we begin to bridge the division present between these two archetypal constructs? Let us start with exploring the foundation, at least a foundation, for distraction as it relates to the Greek pantheon and the nymph Echo. Echo was often chased by Apollo and Pan, and they would shun her advances towards them. And Zeus, however, the father of the Greek gods, would not shun her advances, and he would make use of the mountain nymph. And what would happen is, as a means to distract Zeus's wife, Hera, Echo would often talk and talk and talk for hours upon end, distracting her towards Zeus's indiscretions. And eventually Hera would become wise to this plot by Echo and its capacity in enabling Zeus's affairs, and so she cursed Echo to no longer have a voice of her own, but could only speak towards what was said or repeat words of others. Thus we get the term echo in the English language. Now, the echo in the English language is a repetition of words that are said, and as we've seen in the prior myth of Echo and Narcissus that was explored, Echo could only mimic what was being said by Narcissus, and it eventually became it sowed the seeds for her own demise. It became the essence of the antagonism in the plot that drove Narcissus to shun her, and then her eventually to lose faith in life itself upon Narcissus's demise, the one person that she did fall in love with. Now, how does this relate to self and ego? Well, in distraction, what happens, we're oftentimes brought to a state to look within. We need to begin to consolidate things. We need to find what are the things that do distract our time. Are they play oriented? Are they work oriented? Are they sleep oriented? A lot of times, distraction could equate to a multitude of symptoms that can lead one into the more negative states of personal affairs. Distraction could also lead someone into more joyful states of psychological affairs, albeit at times, if there's too much joy going present, that within itself can also become the foundation for more negative states of affairs. And you could see this around alcohol, drug abuse, social media abuse, various forms of pleasurable activities that may within the pleasure they offer sow the seeds for more destructive behaviors to come. So the distraction really becomes this echoing device. We need to touch upon it over and over again to see if it's more of a burning sensation that drives us to create effective change, which is self-emerging from the sense of I, or is it something that is more on the wavelength for what our soul is guiding us towards in principle as we learn to work, to play, and to relate well with others. Now, as we know, in the case of attention deficits or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, distraction could become a curse of the psyche itself, especially when it leads us down roads that are not really conducive to what the soul is trying to experience in the moment as myth moves us to realize that inner potential. On the other hand, the same distractions, if harnessed correctly, can lead us towards inroads where, by sifting through the ashes of what was distracted by the past, we could begin to see what we were distracted by in the past. We could begin to see glowing embers of light from within that we could then put upon new direction and hopefully ignite some aspect of passion in our soul. In the case of Echo, what we see is, because she distracts the queen by her chitter-chatter, and I'm quite often reminded of the same things as I see television commercials or see ads pop up on social media. There's so much chatter going on around us that it truly seems like we're being distracted from something greater. Now, this distraction is a danger to the self, just like Echo's distraction of Hera created the means from which Hera was not able to see the true indiscretions her husband was conducting upon her, which then made her to retaliate against Echo and only be able to mimic the voice of another, thus stripping from her the capacity to give her own judgment, to discuss these things through. And how often do we see that play out in the realm of social media or traditional media in general, where one thing is said and there's a whole bunch of mimicking voices or thumbs up or smiley faces going around to allow the perception of what is being said to be the truth. This does not make sense to the self. as it relates to ego. It's an ego-driven aspect, even though ego cannot be removed from the self. So what are we to do with the day-to-day distractions that we face? And what lessons have I learned in the process of being so distracted that I inevitably left a forum that I very much enjoyed? As the late Timothy Leary once said, turn on, tune in, drop out. I don't know if this really works for us in this day and age, even though he was an icon of the counterculture era of psychology. What we see happening is too many people are turned on, too many people are tuned in, and everyone seems to be dropping out of the reality that surrounds us. Maybe we need to turn off, tune out, and drop in. Maybe we need to turn off the devices. We need to turn off all the chatter that buys for our attention so we could really begin to tune out those things that are distractions to us. They lead us away from self. Maybe we need to drop back into the self, or as Ralph Waldo Emerson would encourage us to do, is to drop back into nature. For Emerson said, nature always wears the color of spirit, and I can't help but understanding how that nature of spirit would help us to begin to learn what lies within us, because what lies within us is really that element of self that emerges from all the echo, all the chatter that distracts our day-to-day life, that so appeases the ego, but takes us away from what is truly important in our life. And I'm going to end with one last Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. What accomplishments can you bring in your journey to advance confidently in the direction of your dreams? Thank you, and I hope you have a good week.